Imagine it's the year 2118, 100 years from now. A rabbi, a pastor, and an imam walk into a bar. Why? They have nothing else to do. The bar is full and their houses of worship are empty. A joke that bombed or a prophecy? Here's the truth about religion in the Western world. There are lots of empty seats on most weekdays and most weekends. But that's not the tragedy. Empty pews is less of a problem. Empty lives, that's a problem. To the extent that religion is about purpose and values and identity and spirituality, when people choose to walk away from religion, they lose a layer of meaning in their lives, and that's a problem. So yes, houses of worship may be emptier most weekends, but the answer is not dull, boring, irrelevant, obsolete religious experiences. That probably won't bring people back more than once. So I'm going to suggest a controversial solution, but first a little history. Journey with me to the 14th century, 1353 to be exact, in Mainz, Germany, a major center of Jewish settlement in the Rhine Valley. I'd like you to meet Moses. Moses is a beekeeper, and Moses loves his bees. He's amazed how those little creatures can make perfectly formed honeycombs, how those stinging insects can make the sweetest nectar. And so he goes to his rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, why do bees do what bees do?" And his rabbi looks at him and says, "Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita," which means, "How wondrous are your works, O God. Everything you created reveals your wisdom." That rabbi was absolutely certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God made it all happen. As Moses sat in synagogue contemplating the wonder of his honeycombs, his wife went into labor. And after 36 hours of horrific labor, Moses raced home. His wife breathed her last, and his newborn son lived for just a few days before succumbing to unknown illnesses. In agony, he cried out to his rabbi once again. He said, "Rabbi, why did all this happen?" And tearfully, the rabbi took Moses' hands in his and looked into his eyes and held his gaze and said, "Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita." How wondrous are your works, O God. Everything you created reveals your wisdom. That rabbi was absolutely certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God made it all happen. For thousands of years before Moses' time, and for a few hundred years after, the answer to every unknown, to every mystery, was God. How do we get here? God. Why do we suffer? God. What's our future? God knows. For thousands of years, from the Babylonians to the Romans, from the Byzantines to the Vikings, human knowledge actually barely advanced. So the world hardly changed. Think of those paintings, the great medieval masterpieces of scenes from the Bible. Why is it the characters are wearing medieval garb? It's because those painters standing in their time just assumed that all the clothing was the same because nothing ever changed. Judaism, we did it with books. The Talmud. The Talmud is actually a compilation put together in 500 CE of hundreds of years of rabbinic innovation. Hundreds of years of rabbinic innovation. But the rabbis denied that they innovated a thing. In fact, at the very beginning of the Talmud, they wrote, Moses received the Torah, i.e. the Talmud they meant, from Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to the men of the great assembly, and they gave it to us, and we didn't change a word. Of course, historians tell us that the truth is far more complicated. Because we know that Kohanim, that priests, gave way to rabbis, We know that Passover sacrifices became Passover seders, and we know that burnt offerings became Shabbat candles. But rabbis, they didn't celebrate their innovation. On the contrary, they longed for a day when the old world would return. Now let's spin the time clock forward a few hundred years. Now it's 1859. I'd like to introduce you to Moses. He's born on the outskirts of London in a village called Down. He, like his ancestor Moses from Mainz, was also a beekeeper. Now Moses, too, was amazed by his bees and how those industrious little creatures could make honeycombs, and how they worked so hard and how well organized the hive was. And he turned to his rabbi and he said, "Rabbi, why do bees do what bees do?" And that rabbi looked at Moses and he said, "Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita." How wondrous are your works, O God. Everything you created reveals your wisdom. That rabbi was absolutely certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God made it all happen. Moses smiled, nodded, walked away just a little bit unfulfilled. Because these were changing times. People were discovering answers beyond the bounds of religion. When Moses asked his neighbor Charles, "Why do bees do what bees do?" Charles, whose last name happened to be Darwin, told Moses about natural selection, about evolution, about a world that was billions of years old, not the 5,619 years that his rabbi had declared last Rosh Hashanah. And then Charles shared this little ditty with Moses, and Darwin really did write this. "Whilst man, however well behaved, at best is but a monkey shaved." Well, then Moses really learned about the birds and the bees and heard a creation story like no other. The modern author, Yuval Harari, in his blockbuster book, Sapiens, traces the development of human knowledge. And he makes this astounding assertion. He says that with the rise of science over the few hundred years from Moses to us, the key human discovery was ignorance. We realized how much we didn't know. The more we discovered, the more we explored, the more we questioned, the more we realized there was yet to understand. Once, religion had all the answers. But with the explosion of the scientific age, that idea became increasingly absurd. Now we realize that the truth is no longer behind us. It lies ahead of us in the future, often just beyond our grasp. Religion was unprepared for this explosion of knowledge, and it was uncomfortable with it, and indeed often in opposition to it. Even in Darwin's day, religions fought back. They isolated themselves from the blossoming of human knowledge, and they declared the purveyors of this knowledge to be heretics. There were trials, there were expulsions, there were excommunications, there were even arrests. There were declarations of blasphemy. And yet, in the darkness, there were glimpses of light. You see, we are called Reform Jews, capital R, no ED, because the founders of our denomination chose to embrace this changing world. In Pittsburgh, the United States, in 1885, our American Reform forebears broke with tradition and formally embraced modernity in a document that they called the Pittsburgh Platform. Here's a passage from that platform. "We hold that the modern discoveries of scientific research in the domain of nature and history are not antagonistic to the doctrines of Judaism. The Bible reflected the primitive ideas of its own age." 1885, they said that. That was the moment. That was the formal break with tradition, the embrace of modernity, the inception of Reform Judaism in the United States. And Judaism would never be the same. Change now wasn't random, it wasn't haphazard, it wasn't unintentional, it was conscious, it was directed. Change became the hallmark of Reform Judaism. Openness to modernity, the calling card. So here we are. It's 2018. A modern Reform synagogue. Done. Right? You know what I'm going to say. Not so much. Let's consider a relative of Moises and Moses. In 2018, he's just Mo. Mo wishes to marry John. John's not Jewish. Traditional Judaism says none of this is possible. Conservative Judaism says none of this is possible. And in truth, despite the progressivism of this movement, there are some in our movement who have a tough time getting their heads around it. Nevertheless, Mo turns to his Reform rabbi. She is happy to marry Mo and John beneath a chuppah. The three of them work together to create a ceremony that celebrates their love. John's family participates. Mo's family, his parents, are beaming. So Mo and John decide to have a baby. They engage the services of a surrogate mother. Both Mo and John contribute genetic material via a procedure developed in Ukraine. Now that's a story of the birds and the bees that our ancestors never considered. Their daughter Mirabelle is born, a little early with undeveloped lungs, and she's treated with procedures that draw directly from the theories of Charles Darwin and allow her to heal, and soon she's home in the nursery that her dad's lovingly designed for her. I should add, she's already on the Wise School waiting list. So at Mirabelle's bespoke baby naming, specially created to reflect this family, the rabbi decides to recite a blessing that we've all heard before. She says the ancient words, Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai kulam b'chochma asita. But her translation now is poetic. It's different from the one we've heard earlier. She doesn't translate it literally. Instead, she says, how wonderful is our world. Each of us reflects the light of God's mysterious presence. Mo and John hold each other and their sleeping daughter, enriched by a ceremony that affirmed their lives. That rabbi was absolutely certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was so much about the world that remains unknown. That rabbi knew that her search for answers could lead her to Torah, to Talmud, and also to the theories of Darwin and modern philosophers. And yet, in that moment, she was certain that she felt God's presence. This world is changing so fast, it seems there are times we can barely hold on. Truths that we once thought were eternal are gone with the wind, refuted by the cresting waves of human wisdom. And those who resist that encroaching knowledge appear ignorant or cruel or, dare I say, downright medieval. Mo and John and your children and maybe you demand more. You want meaningful ceremonies. You want values that reflect your lives. You want purpose that captures your dream. You want spirituality. And in a radically different world such as ours, a radically different religion is required. In this world, Judaism can no longer hold fast to archaic notions of love and family, of prayer, of the sources of wisdom. Judaism today has to be open. It has to be flexible. It has to be experimental. It has to be inquisitive. It has to be multivocal. And it has to be expansive, arms wide open. Those 19th century Jews, they were on the right path, but we've still got work to do. Now here's the thing. I don't have the roadmap. I don't know where we're going, nor does any one person. There's no prophet, no one that can see into the future and discern what this new Judaism will look like, but we can figure it out together. So here's my proposal. You have got to demand meaningful religious experiences. Now, some of you are very comfortable with tradition. Rest assured that there will always be a place for you in the Reform movement, as long as your arms are open to recognize the practices of others. However, many others of you who don't embrace tradition And some of those who are not even here have turned their backs, and that's where the key to our Jewish future lies. Because you come to us, when you come to us and you say, I don't believe in God, but I want a Jewish ceremony, our response has to be, how can we help? Once I insisted the references to God were at the heart of a Jewish ceremony. I even once turned down a wedding because the couple wanted a secular ritual without any references to God. No longer. If you're a Jewish atheist, I'm here to help you create a meaningful experience. When you come to us and you say, I've chosen to marry a person who's not Jewish, once I would have said, I can't help you. I have a letter in my files from an angry young man rebuking me for refusing to officiate at the wedding to his non-observant Catholic bride. 5 years after that wedding, they're raising Jewish kids, and she decided to convert. Now, if you come to me, I say, how can I help you? If you and your intended fiancé intend to find a place in Jewish rituals, with Jewish rituals at your wedding, I, along with most of my colleagues at WISE, will officiate. When you come to us and you say, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm transgender, I'm bisexual, I'm ready to come out, there was a time when the Jewish community would have turned you away, declared you as abnormal as our Israeli ultra-Orthodox rabbinate did only last month, as they shepherded a heinous anti-LGBTQ bill through the Knesset. But now we say, welcome. Live your lives in our community. We will celebrate your marriage on this bima. We'll celebrate your gender selection on this bima. We'll celebrate your surrogate birth, your in vitro conception, your adoption. However you choose to expand your family, we'll be there with you. When you come to us and you say you're ambivalent about Israel's policies, you're not sure about the decisions of her governments, once we said, you're either with us or against us. Now we say, let's talk. We're ready to listen. We're ready to give you a voice. There's no litmus test for the correct way to love the people and the vision of Israel. When you come to us and you say Jews are Democrats, Jews are Republicans, Jews are socialists, Jews are conservative, once we said the choices are limited and narrow. Now we say the doors are open and the conversation is broad and there's vital energy in the debate, and this is the place, where we don't scream at each other, but we listen to each other. Now, I admit, I don't know where this approach will take us, but I have heard from so many of you, and I am certain that change is essential, and I am certain it can't happen fast enough. Because the tragedy about the turn away from religion today is not empty pews, it's empty lives. We need a transformed Judaism because Jewish experiences define us. They connect us to history, to peoplehood, to our sense of spirituality, our understanding of God. We human beings, we like to belong. We like to celebrate our families, our history, our foods, our cultures, our languages, but it can no longer be the exclusive club that it was. Now, the doors need to be open. Let all who seek meaning join us. Conversion or no conversion, we're here to celebrate your life with you. The Jewish way of debating and reflecting and applying principles to current times can guide our paths. In our world today, though, religion gets a vote. It doesn't get a veto. Stubbornness and inflexibility, that's not indicative of piety. That's indicative of a small mind and a limited worldview. Religion today has to be about openness, about inquisitiveness, about the expansiveness of ideas. Science may tell us what's possible in this world, but religion can help us figure out what's moral. Finally, Jewish religious consciousness allows us to hold on to hope, to tikkun olam. Once we thought technology would automatically bring a better world, that diseases would be eradicated, suffering eliminated, war abolished. Now we know the lie to that. The Jewish community's commitment, though, to holding on to hope, to fixing the world, protects us from despair. Not because we affirm that a magical God is going to swoop down and sweep out evil. No. Because when we place ourselves within the context of the history of our people's cycle from despair to hope, from disaster to redemption, from vanquishment to victory, we can imagine hope, we can find inspiration, and we can dream, and we can see a light at the end of our dark tunnels. So here's another scenario for you. It's 2118, 100 years from now, 2118. A rabbi, a pastor, and an imam walk into a bar. It's crowded. They enjoy a drink with their parishioners. The imam shares a teaching from the Quran that inspires him to embrace his Jewish and Christian friends. The rabbi teaches from Jewish wisdom about hope and tikkun olam. And the pastor speaks about Jesus, his love for the poor and the stranger. Their words are relevant. The crowd is responsive. The vibe is electric, and the mood is hopeful. A fantasy? It can't be a fantasy. Religion today has to pull us forward. Religion today has to uplift us and inspire us and draw us in. The change has to be deep, it has to be profound, and it has to happen now. I don't know where we're going, but I am certain that we can only get there by joining hands and seeking the way together. And I am, and my colleagues, are looking forward to walking the path with you. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita. We live in a world of infinite wonder and immeasurable possibility. May our spirits soar as together we embrace the future. Amen.